Hi, hello, and annyeonghaseyo. My name is Lee, and welcome to my channel. Today, I'll be reviewing and discussing the South Korean LGBT film Bungee Jumping of Their Own. Bungee Jumping of Their Own is a drama following In-woo, a young man who experiences first love with his college sweetheart Tae. However, 17 years later, In-woo, now a husband, father, and working as a high school language teacher, is drawn to a male student named Hyunbin, who mysteriously reminds him of Tae. Released in 2001, Bungee Jumping opened to theaters on February 2nd. It served as the debut film for director Kim Dae-sung and screenwriter Go Eun-nim. Fortunately, this film was successful enough so box office numbers are available despite coming out 20 years ago. It came in as the 10th highest grossing domestic film of 2001 with 947,000 admissions, with roughly 50% attributed to theatrical attendance in Seoul alone. This is without a doubt the most watched film in terms of theatrical admissions of those I've reviewed on this channel as yet. Bungee Jumping went on to win critical praise and numerous accolades from national and international film festivals. Viewer responses to this film were mostly positive and complimentary, describing the film as a beautiful love story, as positive LGBT representation, and a peak example of the cinematic renaissance coming out of South Korea starting in the 1990s. It does star Byung-hun, easily one of the most recognizable and acclaimed actors to emerge from new Korean cinema. Even in Hollywood, where he actually wasn't treated very well, you may have seen him in at least one of these huge blockbusters, or a little-known show no one is talking about called Squid Game. But he also has a full load of absolutely great Korean films to choose from as far as the eye can see. Bungee Jumping was actually released 1 year after his breakout role in Park Chan-wook's excellent Joint Security Area. Now that I've given basic details, this review will be a little different because my experience of this film was a set of contradictions. So, I thought I'd investigate it here. Going into Bungee Jumping of Their Own, here are the things I knew. 1. It starred Lee Byung-hun, who went on to become a massive name in the industry. 2. It was a critical and financial success, like in a more mainstream way. 3. It was one of, if not the earliest LGBT film to come out of South Korea to actually achieve that. 4. It had enough critical traction that academics had written on it prior. And 5. The ending was famously ambiguous, leaning towards poetic profoundness. Now, for one moment, please take a quick look at the film's poster. Male lead, female lead. The tagline very roughly translates to, "Love is a mysterious memory to feel." When I saw this, I asked one question, with respect to representation specifically. Will this film minimize the on-screen presence of gay interactions, and if so, how? Will they A. use a solid portion of the runtime on the past heterosexual relationship, B. use runtime in the present portion of the story for continued flashbacks to the said past heterosexual relationship, or C. use the present portion of the story to portray no tone of romanticism or intimacy between two males? The answer is D, all of the above, all. Unfortunately, I only have one compliment for this film, and that is a credit towards Lee Byung-hun's dramatic performance. Because if I could sum up this experience of watching Bungee Jumping of Their Own in one word, I would say boring. Very boring. I'm aware this is a highly subjective word choice, so let me explain. The linchpin of this film's story is the first love In-woo feels for Tae. We have to be compelled by this young romance as one between soulmates, so we can feel his love for her, his despair when he loses her, and the pull he has towards Hyunbin. If that doesn't work, then there's absolutely nothing to get emotionally invested in. So what do we get? The relationship between In-woo and Tae is stale and unconvincing, i.e. zero chemistry. Taking up about a third of the film's runtime, as was my first prediction, it is the bedrock of the plot, and as college students, they are not interesting characters. It's like watching two pairs of sentient khaki chinos have a love story. Dry, pleated, businesslike, by the numbers. And fulfilling my second expectation, they did flash back to these two even after the bulk of their story had already been told in the beginning third. The other 2/3 are In-woo and Hyunbin, an equally unconvincing relationship that culminates in a bond lacking romantic or sexual tension, accurate per my third expectation. This leads us to the insurmountable obstacle this film unnecessarily places in front of its own story, that makes its romance completely untenable, like a choice that makes us, the viewers, incapable of rooting for queer love to win out. And this doesn't even touch how decidedly unambiguous the ending actually is. First and foremost, Inwoo is a high school teacher. Hyunbin is a high school student. Full stop, that alone is enough to call this whole thing off. Essentially, in order for the viewer to root for a gay relationship to work, we are asked to ignore the unethical, illegal, and genuinely problematic dynamic between an adult teacher and his underage student. Based on this factor alone, in addition to the conclusion and with how boring most of this film is, my initial grade is an F. Here's where I have to go into spoilers. Some trigger warnings for what this film's narrative does feature, including corporal punishment, inappropriate student-teacher relationships, homophobic bullying, implied marital assault and/or sexual violence, and implied suicide. So what happens in the rest of Bungee Jumping of Their Own? Well, Tae was actually hit by a bus just before Inwoo was set to deploy for his mandatory enlistment. He was obviously heartbroken by this. 17 years later, he's married with a child. Working at a high school, he meets Hyunbin, and somehow senses similarities between him and Tae. Almost immediately, he begins exhibiting obsessive behavior towards Hyunbin, wanting to be close to him, participate in school activities with him, talk to him, get his phone number, and hear about Hyunbin's relationship with a girl. As it does turn out, Hyunbin is the reincarnation of Tae and starts to remember his past life. Inwoo then displays abusive behavior towards other students and his own wife, in an attempt to reassert his role as a teacher, distance himself from his feelings, and affirm his own heterosexuality. Students and other teachers soon catch on to their unusual dynamic, and the pair face severe homophobic bullying. In the end, Inwoo quits his job, leaves his wife, and runs away with Hyunbin to New Zealand, a place Tae spoke of wanting to visit. They go to a bungee jumping site and leap to their deaths, committing suicide with the hopes of being reborn as a couple society will accept, same age, and heterosexual. So yeah, that kind of escalated. Looking at this narrative from a current day perspective, it is likely impossible to call this positive representation. Past life or no past life, the protagonist is abusing his position as a teacher to groom and date an underage boy, kidnap him to another country, and then facilitate their commitment of an irreversible act. Furthermore, it is dangerous and irresponsible to put that act on screen as a poetic response to homosexuality and homophobia. And they are asking us, the viewer, to experience some kind of enjoyment or poetic catharsis from this. It is kind of fascinating that Memento Mori, last week's film, can cover much of the same territory, but everything is properly framed as horrifying and having an actual weight to it. It's not romanticized. The events are tragic, and we see the emotional consequences of people's actions. Queerness does not require us to leave our ethics at the door. Let's start with the potential the film had and then where it ended up. Past lives and reincarnation narratives, as well as first love relationships, are fairly common motifs to South Korean cinema and television. Ideas of destiny and fate, of circularity, are frequent structures and themes as well, from reuniting with a first crush, to resolving a childhood trauma, to returning to one's roots or dreams. Melodrama is chock full of meaningful coincidences. Bungee Jumping of Their Own could have expressed a queerness of the soul, told the story of a mature age discovery of bi-curiosity, bisexuality, or how love transcends biological sex and physical form, all while still acknowledging social stigmatization of homosexuality. These are pretty generous interpretations, yes, but literally the only thread of interest is Inwoo's crisis of bisexuality, which is genuinely compelling. He is a man in a crisis. At the time this came out, homosexuality wasn't directly addressed on Korean screens. Inwoo, within the film, came of age in the 1980s, a very different time politically and culturally, requiring a different kind of masculinity and restrictive view of sexuality. There's even a scene where Inwoo goes to see a doctor to better understand his changing attractions, and a medical professional tells him this is actually normal. See, there is an attempt at using medicine, which has long been weaponized against homosexuality, to subvert expectations. Based on this, I do think the director and screenwriter had good intentions, that in 2001 the conclusion was ambiguous enough to suggest tragedy, and I can't say for sure this film didn't speak to at least one gay person, Korean or otherwise. However, it just does not age well. While this film is not widely available, trust me, if you look around, even around YouTube, you may very well find it, for better or worse. Altogether, Bungee Jumping of Their Own is underdeveloped, poorly paced, and its characters' motivations are not well conveyed. Inwoo's relationships with either sex are half-baked at best. Hyunbin is given no interiority or character of his own, really. The ending is known for its ambiguity, but having watched it, it is unambiguous, and it's highly irresponsible. Considering when it came out, I'm raising its grade from an F to a D, the lowest passing grade in a Korean high school. At least that's what I would have given it if not for a few other unforeseen events that occurred whilst editing. I was actually fully ready to give this film slightly more slack because of how long ago it came out and what I believe were good intentions by the filmmaker. But here's what changed. 1. I read the glowing user reviews. 2. I watched the Thai adaptation. And 3. In the year 2021, a Korean streaming platform announced a remake. To me, the issues with Bungee Jumping of Their Own are glaring. So obvious that surely someone else, even one review, would see the problems. But alas, everything I anxiously hoped a viewer wouldn't get from the film is exactly what they praised. There is not a single review on IMDb or Amazon that questions or condemns the student-teacher relationship, nor takes issue with how its taboo-ness is incorrectly equivocated with homosexuality. For unknown reasons, the film puts too many obstacles in the audience's path to enjoy its queerness. Furthermore, it perpetuates what I like to call the heterosexualization of homosexuality, or where they try to fit queerness into a kind of straight logic. Inwoo is not attracted to another male, he is pursuing a minor whose soul is female to him. I do understand that reincarnation in past lives does frequently come up in Korean folktales and may very well have its origins in other religious and cultural traditions. However, some reviewers even thought that perspective was an interesting potential reason for why gay people exist in the first place. They aren't gay, really. Actually, they are spiritually heterosexual because souls are gendered. The reviewers also found the love story and ending as particularly romantic and poetic, like fully embracing the ending as an act of undying love. As I read these reviews, I found myself getting angrier and angrier because it was such a blind acceptance, whether they were written in 2001 or 2015. I cannot imagine that a single positive review was submitted by an actual gay person. There's no way a queer person could watch this film and be grateful for what they've received as brave representation. Only a heterosexual person would see that ending as poetic and not a tragic reminder of lived realities of actual people. There actually was a musical adaptation of this, but I don't have the strength to watch that, so I watched the Thai adaptation, which was released in 2019. This is what I can say. The first 50 minutes of this 2-hour film is beautifully shot, wonderfully acted, and emotionally wrenching. In a twist, the past life is a story between 2 young high school boys, and it's great. After that, turn it off because the back half is switched to straight people for some reason, and they keep the student-teacher relationship and the terrible ending. Of course, this is operating from a different cultural context, both from its country of origin and when it was produced, which the film fleshes out. So yeah, watch the first 50 minutes, then exit the chat. Y'all, just as I was getting tired of talking about this film, out of a clear blue nowhere, a Korean streaming service decided to announce a remake of the film as a K-drama. They've already casted Hyunbin, the student character, and then I had the privilege of scrolling through the Twitter feed of people being so excited for a new gay drama because almost no one knew what the plot actually was. So like anyone else would, I mass tweeted what the plot was and received many shock and dismayed reactions from people who had not a clue of the story. Could this change an adaptation? Maybe. Am I optimistic? No. Will I watch it? Yes. This film, for all its clear-cut problems, refuses to die and keeps on being reincarnated. And I think there's something sad today that this film was progressive for its time, whether I liked it or not. Last things last, I swear, if you want a past-life reincarnation story that is also queer, I still recommend Studio Wabi Sabi's Until We Meet Again, released also in 2019. It's a Thai BL, which, although the genre has a complicated relationship with LGBT+ representation and queerness, is still a far better version of this story. Until next time, goodbye, farewell, and 안녕히 계세요.